Good afternoon and welcome. I am Sophie Hooper, Head of Policy at IWFM, and I'm your host for today's webinar. Today's episode is Transatlantic Perspectives on the Workplace Transition into the Future, which is done in partnership with Envoy, who provide workplace software solutions and who share many of the questions, thoughts, and insights about what the future of work is shaping up to be. I am joined by a fantastic panel who between them have many years of experience in workplace strategies and improving the workplace and employee experience. But before I let them introduce themselves, I want to give some brief context about why we are here today. The pandemic taught us that work doesn't have to be binary. I think that's globally accepted by now. It can be flexible, and many employees expect it to be flexible. Last week at our IWFM conference, Christine Armstrong shared an anecdote about one of her clients who is trying to bring people back into the office. And their people were not interested in coming back in, it turns out. For many, travel has become a discretionary spend that they can spend instead on their life outside work. Other employers may not offer the choice, they just tell their people to come in. But many employees across the globe are asking the why question. Why would they come in when they can do the same work at home? Where has the trust gone? So for workplace people, the challenge remains to create spaces for people to come together to meet, build community, and foster deep connections, all the while so they can bring their whole self to work. The US, the UK, Canada, each have their own unique challenges and cultures. And while working practices and contexts vary across the Atlantic, the sentiments and themes of those challenges tend to influence UK workplaces. Now that we are a few months on from society open up, we still appear to be getting our feelers out. What are organizations experiencing? What steps are being taken? And what does it tell us about what the future holds 5 years down the line? What are the data insights that create better experiences for people in the workplace? And I would like to remind the audience that we will have a Q&A session, but we may start taking questions throughout the session and throughout the structured conversations with the panelists. So please post your questions in the Q&A box from now on, not the chat function. And if you want to remain anonymous, then please type anon before your question. So before we get into our discussion, may I please ask each and every one of you to introduce yourself and share a little bit about your roles. Simone, why don't I start with you?
Sure. Hi, thanks for having me. Simone Fenton-Jarvis. So I'm the Workplace Consultancy Director over at Relogics. We're a Canadian company and ultimately we're a workplace data analytics and integration company. My background has been in FM, workplace, into consultancy from occupier side over to consultancy. And now I'm working with data to drive employee experiences.
Thank you. Greta, would you quickly like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Greta Peterson, and I lead global workplace strategy and development at Miller Knoll, which is a global furniture manufacturing company. And I kind of like to think of myself as an employee advocate. The role of the team as a collective is really to hold our places around the globe more accountable to our people, our point of view, our values, and the organization to hopefully create strategic value across the board.
Thank you. And Jonathan?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jonathan Weindel. I'm the head of data analytics at Envoy. Envoy is a workplace platform that solves the complexity of hybrid work. So we help companies manage hybrid offices so employees can book desks, book conference rooms from anywhere they happen to be. They can sync schedules with coworkers to come into the office together. And for companies, we really make it easier to welcome visitors and keep everybody safe. Envoy's got more than 10,000 customers across 16,000 offices in over 100 companies. And myself are responsible for the analysis of hundreds of millions of workplace data points every year to drive meaning from them and data and insights to guide decision makings, both internally and with our customers. So thanks for having me today.
Well, thank you. And just so that the audience knows, a really special thank you to both Jonathan and Greta, you too, Simone. But Jonathan got up at 4 o'clock this morning to be here because he's based in San Francisco, and Greta is on the earlier side of the working day as well, being based in Michigan. So thank you very much, all of you, for joining today's panel. Right, just to kick off our conversation, please. Now that we are living with COVID, everyone's really coming to terms with the last few years. And as we can see, and the data that some of you have previously presented, occupancy is increasing steadily. For some people, that's voluntarily, others take the mandatory approach. How do you see organizations respond in their workplaces? And who would like to go first with that question? Simone, you raise your eyebrows.
Yeah, happy to. I think depending on where the organisation is globally, there's many different approaches. So the occupancy, the data that we've been capturing is, we measure 40 million square feet globally. So the interesting trends that we've seen is the differences between each location. And if you take it right up to last week, Europe occupancy was sitting at like 28%, whereas North America was at 45%. So that's showing the difference. Now, I guess that is highlighting how different the approaches are. And the organizations I'm working with are very much kind of one extreme to the other. We've got some saying, use the office whenever you want, no rules, guidance at all. You use it when you want to use it. We've got people in the middle that are saying, we want you to come in 3 days a week or 2 days a week. This is what you're going to be here for. And then we've got the extreme of saying, we want you back 5 days. And that is the global difference like that we're seeing. It's crazy to watch it, to be honest.
Great, thank you. Greta, do you have something? I saw you nodding furiously a few times.
I'd say at least the experience that we've had looking at our own facilities in general, in facilities that we've even recently transformed, we've had more of a voluntary approach, at least for our North American offices. And we're still struggling from quite low utilization. Commute is something that I think impacts our utilization in particular. And we're seeing pretty, normal spikes midweek-ish, but it is not at a level of critical mass that we're so far away from where I'd like to see us be at some point in time. And I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of things that are out of our control at the moment that are a little difficult to move on from. So.
Great. Jonathan, perhaps you can shed a little bit more light on kind of what the differences are across the country and perhaps also across the different sectors, because we heard from Simone, very different depending on which continent you're in. But do you observe anything across different sectors?
Yeah, absolutely. In general, I think, many companies are still trying to figure out what the new environment looks like and what hybrid work looks like. And really there continues to be a lot of trial and error in terms of figuring it out. But I think the trend is certainly here. Before the pandemic, the majority of employees were coming into the workplace every day of the week. And today, at least we see in the data, a lot of people are coming in more the middle of the week. As Greta mentioned, we see about 65 to 70% of workplace entries coming in the middle of the week. Tuesdays and Wednesdays generally being the most popular and Fridays being the least popular, but it does certainly vary by industry. I think there are some industries where it's much more of a requirement to come in every day of the week. It's sort of like mandatory essential workers, things like that. But we certainly see in some sectors like the IT sector, more of an adoption of hybrid work. And some of it is how flexible those environments are. Some sectors are much more flexible in terms of being more hybrid and others less so. So I think it's something that is continuing to ebb and flow over time, and it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next 6 months to a year.
Okay, for those organisations that are a little bit more voluntary in their approach, obviously people need to respond to the incentives that are being offered. What are you seeing as a panel works well to incentivise people to go back into the office? Any takers?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing for me is to avoid the amenities approach of, you know, come back to the office because we've got this, this and this. That's almost just like a hygiene factor. That's not an attraction anymore. I think the thing what is working well is reminding people that they've missed people and why they've missed people, and reminding them what they used to do when they were together in an office. Because we've almost forgot. We've forgot about all them things that we were doing when we were in the office. We forgot how to behave in an office, I think, as well sometimes. And I think actually the best thing that we can do is to say, this is what we want you to come to the office for. And it's definitely not, you know, the ping pong table and the beer taps, it's people.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Simone. I think in terms of just, you know, the amenities and things, that's helpful, but I'd say get people back once and that resurrects that memory of what they've been missing. And at least from my standpoint, what I continue to hear, it's I forgot how much I missed this. And it's just get them back one day and then you've got them back for good. And that's going to be a little more flexible in the future, right? It's not going to be the 5 days a week. At least it's not going to be for us, but that's that tipping point is, you know, maybe it's hosting an event and coming together and rallying around something that's bringing people together, but it's with purpose and it's really lighting that fire and reigniting that fire again.
Yeah, I agree. I think two things really stand out in my mind. The first is to really focus on the employee experience and make the office a fun place to be, to Simone and Greta's point. And also on the purpose side, really making sure that there is purpose around you know, the type of work that you're doing in the workplace, right? I think one of the things that employees value most is sort of like that in-person, you know, collaboration, whiteboarding, bouncing ideas off of people, and making sure that people sort of, you know, realize that value when they're coming back into the workplace, you know, and maybe when they're not in the workplace, there's more focused time for heads down work. And so making sure that it is very purposeful, both in the workplace and then purposeful when you're not.
Brilliant. I was going to kind of highlight purpose and employer experience from what you've just contributed. Paul Phillips just asked the question where he would like you to finish off his sentence for your organization. And I think purpose and employer experience go some way, but still that's being personalized for organizations. And the sentence is, we have a workplace office because... little game.
Oh.
So my organization, we have a workplace office because we've got people all around the globe, and the central office is used as a place to get people together in a central location on a quarterly basis. And then throughout the normal standard weeks, we're actually using it to build our hardware as well.
Excellent.
I'd say we have a workplace because we need a place to collectively come together to build community and our broader culture.
Jonathan?
Yeah, very similar. We have a workplace, I think, to build deep connective tissue between everybody and to really foster collaboration between cross-functional partners.
Thank you. And it really kind of resonated with me when you were talking about that collaboration, because this morning in the office, we had completely forgotten what we were supposed to be talking about or not supposed to be talking about. So it's really quite applicable to the conversation. I'd be interested in understanding a little bit. I mean, you're all very deeply ingrained in the workplace strategy and you obviously play a key role, but which teams, departments in general, are playing a key role to enabling people to return to work? Greta?
It's it's HR, it's the real estate group, it's the broader facilities management team. We've got a whole host of what we call community liaisons across our offices that are helping as well. It's our folks from IT, technology, helping ensure that everyone has the tools they need to succeed and be productive no matter where they're located. So there's a lot of people who have seats at the table now.
Can I just ask you to expand a little bit on community liaison?
Yes.
That sounded a little bit more.
Yeah, so thinking about the role that someone plays, so Jonathan's point, that connective tissue, think of that person as the person who is responsible for connecting people to people, people to the place where they are, and people to the resources and tools they need to be successful while in the office, knowing that we're leveraging a network of places and we will be hosting a lot of people from different locations or maybe from different areas of the globe, so that everyone feels welcome no matter where they are.
Brilliant. Does anyone else want to add to that answer? Simone?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, apart from everything that Greta just said, I think the other key thing to remind us as well is the role that leadership is playing, good and bad. So yes, they're an enabler, and it might be that they're not doing things operationally day to day, but they're setting the tone of the business. They kind of, their behaviors, role modeling more than ever, I found is absolutely crucial over the last kind of year or so, especially. We're looking at people, and if we can see them behaving in a way that we're not attuned, we start amending our behaviors to what they're doing because they're the leaders. That's what I see across every company I work with.
Brilliant.
And I think for me on the IT side, certainly everyone now is familiar with Zoom and Teams and all these technologies, but those technologies that also help enable hybrid work, right? What does that look like? And so workplace leaders continuing to adopt, technologies to facilitate that and what this new environment looks like. They're definitely driving a big role here.
Thank you, Jonathan. And actually that's prompted me to think, kind of building on enabling tools. What do you think has changed from a needs perspective, both from organizations and people, because that's not always necessarily the same. So any thoughts as to what has changed from a needs perspective?
Yeah, I can go first. I feel like from an organization point of view, we focused early on in the pandemic around things like we need people to be able to book a desk because we need to see how many desks we need. Whereas the employee was thinking, actually, I want to book a desk because I want to see who else is in the office and who is it worth me going there. I want to see, am I going to be able to have the conversations in person? And I feel like that gap is now being bridged through lots of different technologies, like Envoy. And I think, there's been definitely a massive difference between what the employer has needed and what the employee has needed. And I think all the HR, workplace, real estate, IT are now working together to make sure that's a little bit more aligned.
Greta, was that?
Some of what I've seen more at the employee level so far is the need to digitize processes and have those manifested somehow in the physical environment. So in some of our more recent projects, it's teams adopting a new tool like Smartsheets, for example, to track product development cycles and milestones, because these teams are global and they need real-time sharing of that information and tracking of that information. So in team rooms, for example, we're designing dashboarding monitors and installing that around conference room tables and more. It's a lot of monitors, to be honest, but generally speaking, trying to help them bridge the gap between what has historically been very paper-based and inaccessible to global teams to more digital processes and supporting that. So that's been a huge shift for our people in trying to migrate towards more cloud-based tools and tracking.
Great. Jonathan, are you seeing anything on top of that?
No, I think those are most of the major things as well from my end.
Great. based on that kind of slightly changed needs, what are you observing are the key drivers for organizations to invest in hybrid workplaces? Simone.
So I feel like I'm going first all the time. I'm like,
well, you did take that, breath.
Yeah, I was like, oh, I think the biggest driver is the fact that if they don't do it, then they're not going to keep hold of their people. I think, that is at the moment you're seeing, I don't feel like organizations have an option but to do this. It felt like right early on in the pandemic, it was like, oh, we could choose a different way of working after this because we know this works. And now if people are not doing it, it's not going down very well with people. So yeah, I feel like it's been forced a little bit.
Okay. Greta or Jonathan, any follow on that?
Yeah, we recently launched a survey to more than 400 workplace leaders coming from companies of all different sizes. And what we found was that 58% of companies said they invested more in workplace technology last year than the year before. And they expect that trend to continue. Investment in a lot of different things, right? So the things that you would think about, conferencing technology, but also, visitor management, physical security tech are all top of mind. So just a continual need to continue to, especially as we move into a world that is more hybrid in nature, technologies that help with that adaptation and help make that a smooth transition, because a lot of these companies are still sort of testing these waters.
Mm-hmm. I'd say the thing I'll add here is, in terms of agreeing with both what Jonathan and Sophie have mentioned, I'd say for us, where we're trying to bridge the gap now is the education and the empowerment piece. So launching these new tools and, putting money and investing into new environments, et cetera, et cetera. We can't always expect employees to just understand how to do it or how to figure it out for themselves, because people are burdened with enough already. So how do we create the right types of learning and engagement tools to help people learn how to go about onboarding with Microsoft Teams, for example? I know we've all been doing this for some time now, but there's quite a few ways that we can continue to streamline and get better and leverage new tech and new tools in new ways. That there's this learning and engagement and empowerment piece that I think can help people work better together, even furthermore than investing and just giving them the option to have these things. It's learning how to use them well.
Okay, thank you for that. Greta, I'd like to stay with you for a moment, because earlier on in the conversation, you mentioned that there are many things that are kind of outside your control in terms of barriers and challenges about returning to the workplace. So I'd like to explore that a little bit. What are the biggest challenges in the workplace, and how are companies trying to manage that?
So I'd say within the ecosystem of being hybrid, right? There's the me-based decisions where, do I want to come into the office today? Does the office support the work that I need to do? Versus the collective we decisions. And I think we're at this we have a very interesting tension going on, because depends on the person, depends on the team, and how those decisions are getting made collectively. And to Sophie's point earlier, what are the leadership team? How are they leading by example? What are work team leaders and middle management doing? I think middle management is a really, really critical piece to hybrid work getting fully embraced. But generally speaking for us, I think it's that tension between the me and the we decision making. And for us, it's the locations in which our offices exist. And in some cases, it's kind of a catch-22. We've got our headquarter locations in more urban locations, and we've got a whole host of locations that are in more urban ones, which are more accessible to public transportation, et cetera, et cetera. So generally speaking, what's the threshold commute? What's the commute threshold? I don't know what the answer is. And I don't know what our location strategy needs to be moving forward, but that is a huge tension that we're dealing with at the moment as well, is what's that threshold for our people moving forward, and how does that fit into our talent strategy? So sorry, those are some big things.
We'll explore a few of them later. Simone.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is, I guess, the commute is definitely an interesting one. I look back in even last few years, and when I went down to a conference recently and I was going to London at 5 a.m. in the morning, I was thinking, I don't know, I used to do this all the time, and I don't think I want to keep doing it. And I think there's definitely the commute is a big thing that's standing out. I think there's obviously people want more flexibility, they want more freedom. You're looking at the organizations as well that have had a reduction in sick days. That's been an interesting one. And is it because the people are not as ill, or is it because people are not at that stage where they're not ill enough to ring in sick because they're at home? If they're going into an office, would they ring in sick? So there's an interesting movement there, and I think there's lots of challenges to try and make sure, I guess, from an organization point of view, that if people are ultimately working at home and they're working through being ill, then that's not good either. So I think it's how do we keep a culture that is, it's all right to take a day when you need it as well.
Great. Jonathan.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I echo both what Greta and Simone said. I think one of the challenges is that, employees are continuing to, value flexibility, and, a lot of what people have been doing for the past couple of years, they've been able to do so very successfully at home. And so, understanding again what's sort of like the value add for coming back into the workplace. And I think a lot of that is flexibility, but sort of, one of the challenges is sort of communicating that and understanding the new needs of employees and what they value and what brings them purpose, both in the workplace and out. And so I think that communication is a big challenge, and sort of like understanding those needs and desires, because they have shifted quite a lot over the past couple of years.
Thank you. I'd briefly like to touch on productivity, because UK PLC is mentioned quite often. Where are we going with productivity? The news of late is not necessarily that great. Last week at our conference, we talked about productivity going up when people started to work from home, but actually we're not necessarily seeing those increases anymore. Where are we kind of landing? So how can we do better for the future, given all of the challenges that are out there? What are the barriers to greater productivity? And I appreciate that if you sold that one, you're made for life. But we'll just settle for, an attempt at that.
Yeah, I'll go first. I'm trying not to. I think, I wrote a book early on in the pandemic around human-centric workplaces, so I'm going to throw that out there. We need to start putting people at the heart of the organization, and not just at the heart, but people are the bottom line. And we can't keep making decisions that are affecting our people and then expecting them to be productive. So I think we need to take a more human-centric approach to how we look at productivity. Is it productivity? Is it output? We're not machines. We're never going to be finely tuned, oiled workings and cogs. We're going to have days where we have off days. We're going to have days where we just think, wow, I've absolutely been amazing today. I've done everything that I wanted to accomplish. That's not going to be every day. And it's the ebb and flow of that, and how we measure the output over the weeks and months and years, and how that contributes to the business. Because if you ask an employee what productivity means, it's, I've got through my to-do list. It's awesome. I've ticked everything off. If you ask an organization, okay, well, how much money have we made today because of how productive people have been? Often that is the case. Or what is the impact because of how productive people have been? That might not translate into what was on them to-do lists. And often what is on people's to-do list, the organization don't even know that that's on a to-do list somewhere. So I think there's a massive issue with productivity and how we perceive it. So I think we need to start looking up at a macro level about what the organization is achieving from an output point of view and an impact and purpose point of view, and also like I said, the impact, but the damage it's having as well on the planet.
I think that's one of the challenges, is that often one of the arguments that I hear about a challenge of going back into the workplace is a decrease or a lack of productivity. There's many more distractions. People are tapping on my shoulder. It's hard to do my work. But I think, again, sort of like, flipping that on its head, and what is the impact that you're driving? And productivity can be measured in all different ways. And so, again, like having the workplace be a place of collaboration, and while there might not be like a tangible output, right? In terms of measuring productivity, like there certainly is a big value add there. And so a lot of it depends on your definition of productivity and what you mean by that, and what output is. But I think it certainly sort of like that the impact that you're driving is also something important to measure.
Brilliant.
Where I'll take that, Jonathan, is just reframing, thinking about, at least from my perspective, productivity is much broader now. Thinking about return on investment historically, where maybe place equals cost, right? And shifting our mindset to place equals value. And what is the value? What is the return on value that place can deliver for the people and for the business at the end of the day? And that includes, employee perceptions of productivity, to whatever definition that means to them or the organization. But it also, I think, when we think about value, it includes a lot of other really important things, like increases in engagement, reductions in voluntary turnover, other senses of community building, sense of pride in place. It is so hard to just look at a singular input now and output. We really need to think about it as a system, and that one thing does not cause another. It's a whole series of things that can implement and make for positive change.
I can add as well, so something I saw Neelisha post on LinkedIn this week. He commented, and I loved it. He commented on a piece around productivity, and he was saying it's not about productivity, it's basically about performance. And when you're performing, you feel it and everybody else feels it, and everybody else knows what your impact is, and you know what your impact is. So it was, I won't misquote him, it was something along the lines of that, but I thought it really resonated. So.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you for that. I think this is something that might be worthwhile exploring further offline, because otherwise I could get lost in a social value conversation possibly, because when we start talking about impact, that immediately breaks open the entire value chain of what organizations do, not just for their people, but also for planet, etc. And there are ways of demonstrating that that already exist, but are not necessarily part of everyday business, unless you go down the route of ESG, which is coming up, but that's not today's discussion. And I can easily see how we could get lost there, or not lost, possibly found, but right. Back to some of the questions. Earlier on in the year, there was a lot of traction with the whole Great Resignation concept. As society was opening up, people were also opening up and exploring what their options were, and perhaps there was a better employer out there. I guess I've got a two-part question, because some of the noise around that has gone down. Do you think that's still ongoing, the Great Resignation? And what do you also observe in terms of organizations meeting that challenge? And Greta, you already touched a little bit on talent retention before, but I'd like to talk about that a little bit more. So Great Resignation, do you still see it ongoing? And what policies are being in place to try and tackle that?
Yes, I think it's still ongoing, maybe to lesser extents in other areas of the globe, but I know at least here in North America, that seems to be prevalent. Jonathan, I know you're based on the West Coast, but I'd say yes. At least for us from a policy standpoint, thinking about not only the hybrid work guardrails of, those expectations if you are, within a 100-mile radius of a main location, but more remote hiring practices where we're hiring globally for roles. We're not looking to attach people to specific locations unless the role and the position requires it. Vacation, going with self-regulated vacation, I'd say that has been another policy change that we've seen a lot of great traction on as well, to remain competitive in the marketplace. So it all goes back to flexibility and I think supporting the person. So those are a few things that I would add.
Great. Jonathan, do you have any insights to further add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think certainly the headlines or what you sort of read in the media, in terms of the Great Resignation, the Great Reshuffle, that has subsided a lot, but I think that's definitely still going on. Employees had, for better for worse, a lot of time to sort of self-reflect during the pandemic around what is important, right? And I think a lot of that sort of led to, well, hey, actually, this is my passion, or actually, I see myself being at a different company, and a lot of that is driven by, so I think a lot of that self-reflection. And what people find purposeful. I do think flexibility is key here, and one of the things that organizations can do most to attract and retain talents, even more so than other sort of traditional perks. I'm sort of in Silicon Valley area and known for lots of these sort of lavish perks, but I think above all of that, flexibility has really reigned key. In terms of, when you come into the workplace, when you don't, what hybrid means, vacation policies, things like that. So, I think creating a workplace that people want to be at is very helpful, and all the perks that come with that. But flexibility from companies that I've talked to has really been one of the most valuable things.
Great. Simone?
I think from my point of view, I think it's when you dig into the data, for me, it's not the Great Resignation. I think I've been calling it the Great Realization. I think we've just realized that we want better, we want different, we might want career changes, a different purpose, something that's aligned to our values, different colleagues, different working patterns. It's so mixed up in all of these different components. And I think if we look, how many people actually changed jobs during the pandemic, how many people waited because they didn't want to risk it, they didn't know how long this was going to go on for, they didn't want to be onboarded in a virtual world maybe. There was all these things putting people off from changing jobs. They wanted the security. So is it a great resignation, or is it just that during the pandemic we didn't want to change jobs, and actually once we felt things had settled a little bit, people started changing jobs, and it's probably churn that would have happened over the last 2.5 years. But then also, how much is it tied to just realizing that you want a different stuff? As Jonathan said, that reflection. And I've dug into data with 4 organizations so far, and the churn is no different now to what it is pre-pandemic and during the pandemic. During the pandemic, it dropped off. So for me, it's just balancing out. I think it's the media, clickbait, headlines, it sells papers. So
thank you for that. Interesting, great realization, nice play of words. I was actually expecting in all of this, some of the ways to really address people coming back into the office or retaining them, 2 different policies to be mentioned. I expected equity, diversity and inclusion to be mentioned, and I was also expecting health and well-being to be mentioned, because, well, I'm working on quite a bit of that, given feedback from a lot of our members, and also because it's just so important, given everything that's gone on recently. The Economist will have had many pieces about how some parts of society are being left behind about going back into the office, and they can really seem to pinpoint that. So we've heard lots, well, I definitely have heard lots about representation back into the office, or rather the opposite. Any of the data that you're encountering, focusing on the EDI first, can you draw conclusions or not?
There's definitely less women returning to the office in the data that I've looked at. And I know that's one of the points here is there going to be a massive difference on who's being seen, who's not being seen? When we dig into that, I think there's an element of the themes that have come through are even looking at personality types. It's the research that I've done so far is showing that actually the guys like to be in the office with the mates, and actually women are not as bothered. So that's not my opinion. That is something that's come through the data. So that's been interesting to see, because I've never thought about that until it started coming through. And then I think the other thing that has come through really is how much organisations are really trying to get women back into the workplace. The organisations that are trying to do the right thing are trying to say, we want to support you to come back to the office. We don't want you to be missed out. So there's almost like a keeping in touch day that happened during maternity leave. There's almost like a theme of that happening of, we want you to come into the office to keep in touch because we don't want you to be overlooked. And that's an interesting theme that I've seen come through the research as well.
Okay. Does anyone else have any other perspectives to give on that? No. That's really interesting, Simone, that you mentioned that, because actually the focus seems to be on women, but in terms of diversity, we are, well, obviously women are kind of half of it, but we've talked a lot about neurodiversity and race over the last year. So it will be interesting in the future to keep on mapping that. And if anyone has any insights on that in the forthcoming future, please continue to share that with us, because we're doing quite a lot of work on that particular piece, especially also from an FM profession side. It's pretty dominated by one gender and race, actually. Health and well-being is also one of these, well, I guess like Great Resignation, perhaps a buzzword, but we have seen a lot more attention being spent on health and well-being, and what does that look like? Does anyone want to share any particular thoughts about what they are seeing from that perspective to also entice people to stay into the office more?
Yeah, I mean, I've been working with an organisation called Shape Global, and they're all about data analytics within the health and wellbeing sector, and like listening to some of the things that they've been finding from the data. We've gone from almost obviously being concerned during the pandemic, worried about COVID, our loved ones and all that kind of thing. We've gone then into this thing of like feeling lonely, and almost then into an existential crisis of what am I meant to be doing? And now we're trying to work out still where all of this sits. And I feel like health and well-being is, I'm speaking to more and more people that are struggling day to day because they've not quite adapted to being back to normal. And what normal isn't the normal that they adjusted to over the last 2.5 years. So I think health and well-being, more than ever, it definitely can and should be a buzzword. There's obviously so many things that are coming through from a technology point of view, how to connect people, how to educate people. But again, we need to focus on that human to human connection. Listen to people, have conversations. It's amazing the power of somebody struggling, just being able to talk and to have someone to listen. So for me, like, that is a crucial thing that can happen. And I would say that is better in face-to-face in the workplace. But if that's not doable, then, Teams or Zoom or whatever you want to use, that's still good enough. But I think we need to focus on how to connect with people, especially people that are maybe living alone as well, or they've not got large circles of friends. I'm an introvert. At the start of the pandemic, I was like, yes, I don't have to see people. A few months down the line, I was like, I need to see people. I'm going to go crazy. And I feel like now I'm trying to work out where that balance is again. So
great. Greta or Jonathan, do you want to comment further on what you've seen in the health and well-being space?
I'd say just preliminarily to build on maybe not the mental piece of well-being, but the physical piece. So I know we've talked a little bit about amenities and things, and I know for us, that's looking at ensuring people have access to high quality, healthful food, at a reasonable price, gyms, water filling stations, natural light, greenery, biophilia, etc. But what I've seen, and this is all sort of anecdotal, just talking to people so far, is that when they're in the office, they are much more mobile, they're much more active than they are at home, and you tend to be much more sedentary. So when we think about sort of that draw of not just the connecting people to people, but the physical aspect of being together as well, that you're just much more active. And I'd say that's good for you, right? So I think there's something there. I don't know what it is yet, but I think that that's interesting. So.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and we have definitely heard from a lot of companies that there is definitely a bigger focus on health and well-being and mental health education and support since the start of the pandemic. I think that there was a lot more just focus on that, both by individuals and now with companies. And so I think that support is super important, and we've seen a lot of adoption of that across different companies, sort of broader programs and sort of groups within organizations popping up to help support that, which is great. I think a lot more still needs to be done, but I think a lot of companies are on the right track, and I think again that helps employees feel supported and heard, and it is a more inclusive environment from that perspective, which is great.
Thank you. I was just thinking around the role of standards on health and well-being, because it seems like organizations are really still trying to find their way on what exactly do we understand. And Greta, Simone, and Jonathan, you kind of filled in some of the blanks of a great variety of things that people are doing. But there are standards in this place. And to mention social value again, when that word became a buzz, a big barrier to its uptake of driving that was that there wasn't a framework in place that could kind of help shape things. There is that for health and well-being, and yet anecdotally, I'm hearing that actually the frameworks are a bit more of an inhibitor to drive health and well-being. I'd be interested to understand what you understand in this space around the role of standards and whether you really see them being pushed or not.
I think for me, the bit that stands out is with standards, when you talk to organisations, they don't know how to implement it. So they know what the standard is, and they know that that's what could be or should be working to, but they're just not sure about how to operationalise it and how to scale it across their business. So I think there's good intentions, but there's not enough from a policy point of view of practical guidance to say, this is what this looks like. And I think that's a theme that I keep hearing. And then you've got things like, you could take in the UK, display screen equipment regulations, they've not been updated since 1992. Well, I was 4 in 1992. It was seriously saying that our requirements have not changed in all of that time. Why have these things not been updated? To try and not just guide standards, but legislation.
Yes, I think we can still wait a little while for some of that, given the cogs of the wheel turning very slowly at the moment. Greta, you looked as if you wanted to come in.
I'd say, to build off of just thinking about time, right? I think at least for us, we just try to do the right thing, right? And absent of standards, I mean, we need to follow regulations, of course, but I think when it comes to thinking about being progressive and trying out new things, I think it comes down to making good people-centered decisions and trying to do the right thing.
Thank you. Okay. Kind of huge, well, we all know huge changes have taken place over the last few years, whether it's on the axis of space design, the role of technology in enabling people to work, and also around the timing that people choose to work. There's much greater flexibility, which is core workplace kind of strategy. Given the revolution that seems to have taken place amongst that, what are you seeing in relation to the use of technology and the use of the associated data? And if you need me to elaborate on that question, I'll happily do that.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, there's just a greater adoption of all types of workplace technology, right? Not only from like, visitor management and entry systems, but also in tracking who's coming in and out of the workplace, but hot desking and booking rooms and things that are much more focused on hybrid work. Around the data and insights, something that our customers are really valuing is like the data insights as regards to like space utilization, capacity management, and understanding, these companies have these giant floors and, not everyone is coming into the workplace every day. So what does that mean? How do I best optimize that space? How do I help free up desks for people who are coming in part-time? And what does that look like? And what should the strategy be? And so I think data around and technologies to support that and to provide insights and strategy around how should they best optimize what they've got and how does that change the strategy for what they do in the future has been super important.
I think for me, the technology has been a natural evolution from us being in our homes where we've got everything that we need from a smart home environment, maybe. I always ask this question when I speak, face to face with people, and it's how many of these devices have you got in your home? And usually, people are heading between 30 and 40 smart devices in their home these days, which is crazy. So how we can't go from that to then into the workplace where the Wi-Fi is dodgy and nothing's plug and play and everything's not seamless, because it's making the resistance easier to resist against, I guess. So I think there's that element. I think from a data point of view, how we talk about it is, you've got survey data, which is ultimately the people's kind of desires. What is it they're actually wanting? You've got booking data of this is what people's intent is. So, and then you've got things like sensor data or access control, which is this is what the actual behavior was. And what we are seeing is a massive difference between where people's desires are and then their actual behaviors. And we're still trying to understand, I guess it's just how I always say it is, you sign up for gym membership and you go, oh, I'm going to go on peak and I'm going to go 4 or 5 times a week. Actually, life gets busy. We don't do that. And this is what we're seeing almost in the workplace is life's getting busy for people and they're not going to the workplace like they intended. So how we're trying to use that data then is to say, well, this is a difference and this is why you need the data, which is, sensors or access control, if that's what you're trying to do from a space design point of view, and using the data to inform design and to give the people the space types, the sizes of spaces that they need to do the task that they're doing when they come to the workplace. So there's, I think as an industry, we're quite immature in our data analytics and our adoption of technology. FM's using technology, it's been quite immature and we're still trying to catch up. And I think it's more important than ever that we expedite that, because it's crucial for the future to get people using the spaces how we want them to use them and how they want to use them, more importantly.
That's useful. Thank you, Simone. I think what's really interesting is once again, you kind of, from a UK perspective, you indicate that we're still quite immature in understanding the data and how to interpret it as well, to analyze it. Greta and Jonathan, how do you see that happening in North America? do you think there is a much greater uptake, not just of the technology, but then the use of the data to then inform the decision making? Who wants to go first?
Jonathan, I'll let you go first on that.
Yeah, I don't know if there's greater adoption necessarily. I would say that there's just a great desire for that data in general. Companies are just really grasping for getting their hands on the data to help guide them in decision making right now, because, you know, as we sort of stated, a lot of companies are, you know, hybrid work is a bit of a trial and error, and, you know, helping companies get the data that they need to help understand, one, how's that going, both from a like raw data, who's coming in and out of the workplace, to how are employees feeling about that. So sort of gathering more of that qualitative data and sort of putting that, you know, juxtaposing that and combining that data to drive a strategy. And so I think most companies don't have that data today, and they're desiring that in a great way.
Okay. You mentioned trial and error, and actually someone mentioned it earlier in the chat as well. We also spoke about that axis of space design, technology, and then the flexibility in choosing when you're working. And again, trial and error. It's all kind of trial and error at the moment. Where do you think you'll see some of the changes happening within that space of, well, space design, flexibility, technology? What are you anticipating across those?
For me, it's all about the focus of connecting people, whether that's space or technology. I think it's coming away from gimmicks and getting to the deeper connections. How does spaces and technology truly connect people?
Okay. Greta or Jonathan, do you have anything to add to that?
I was just going to say, just to, again, have purpose in spaces in the workplace. I think that's a big theme that we've heard from different companies and customers is, you know, having that, having those like natural areas for collaboration and whiteboarding, sort of like, you know, less formal, you know, more, you know, free form sitting, you know, not like desk environment, but, you know, couches or things like that, where you can just have more natural conversations and being purposeful about having those different places in the office so that you can sort of foster that environment, you know, rather than it sort of feeling like, you know, more of the traditional, you know, sit down, you know, I've got a desk and that's where I'm going to stay the entire day. Because, you know, a lot of people can do that at home.
Great. We're running out of time, so I would like to have one final question to each and every one of you. While we know that we can't make any snap judgments about the future of work, we've just spoken about trial and error and that keeping on going for a little while. What can our current experiences tell us about what the future of work might look like in 5 years' time? Because now we're still cooking it up. Where do you think we'll land in 5 years' time? Jonathan?
Yeah, so yeah, maybe I'll sort of lay out what I think is going to happen over the next few years, and then in 5 years' time. So I think we'll continue to see a lot of trial and error over the next couple of years as companies sort of figure out, you know, how to draw more people back into their office. One thing's for sure is that the workplace before the pandemic will not be the same one in a few years' time. And the trend I think will really be the sharing of everything from desks to parking spaces. You know, we've gone from individual offices to cubicles to assigned desks in open spaces to shared desks. And I don't really see us going back. 5 years out, I think that many folks won't have designated offices, but they'll be working out of offices, right? So like the demand for co-working spaces will continue to rise. And, you know, the future of work won't be 5 days a week, in my opinion. Nor will it be entirely remote. The answer somewhere lies in between. And I think, you know, regardless of the geography or the industry, a successful workplace will be sort of about creating great experiences for people so that they choose to come in and work. And then it's very, again, purpose driven, so that there's a purpose for coming into the workplace. There's intent for, what you're going to be doing while you're there. And then intent for, when you're not. So definitely a workplace that's a lot more flexible.
Thank you. And there's a huge debate ongoing about the 4-day work week. Greta, what are your thoughts?
So I'd say from a 5-year perspective, it's a bit hard thinking about the cycle of leases in the real estate market. So I think 5 years will be sort of in the short term. It's going to be a short term. So I'd say similarly to Jonathan's point, more testing, more failing fast, right? And I'd say big picture though, we need to be sure and be mindful of not making singular successes in, piloting a brand new beautiful space without paying due attention to the technology advances that are needing to be made, as well as the policies and the practices and the behavior changes and the education that's required to be helping people and be empowered to make decisions that work for them. And so future focused, I think for us, we're going to see much more of a network of places approach, where we're coming in much more of an event-based fashion, whether that is an event that is team scaled or is business unit scaled. I think that's going to become more common for us as we look at our 5-year future in curating those experiences so that they are very purpose-driven and that they're delivering value to people coming together, and they're seeing the why, right, for themselves and for the business. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Simone.
I think for me, if you look at the evolution of work, you've gone from utility to productivity to engagement to experience. I think for me, the next kind of thing on that is human, hence the book. But I think human-centric, because ultimately we're going to focus on community, belonging, purpose, the deeper things about being a human being. And I think that's where the workplace is going to focus. And it's going to be interesting, I think where I want the workplace to be and maybe where we are probably quite not aligned at the moment. I think we can go a lot quicker than we are doing. It feels like the pendulum's still kind of swinging and we need it to settle somewhere. And that's going to be an interesting 5 years. So I'll look forward to the next 5 years and see how many more grey hairs I can achieve over the next 5 years from it all.
Well, thank you all very much. Unfortunately, we had an interesting question come through at the end, but we have run out of time now. I would really just like to thank Jonathan, Greta and Simone for today. And we definitely shouldn't forget our tech support, Lucy and Lauren. Purpose, giving a clear why, database decision, and last but not least, human-centric focus is what I'll take away from today's discussion. Thank you to the audience as well. A recording will be available for anyone who wants to listen again or share it with a friend, and we'll be back again sometime soon. Thank you all for your participation. Thank you so much. Bye.